Breaking news alerts lit up screens across the globe, sending shockwaves through capitals and living rooms alike. The world paused, eyes glued to the relentless stream of updates, as the story unfolded in real time. Kremlin's $15.6 billion gamble on Kim's arsenal implodes. One headline blared, capturing the magnitude of the disaster. The collapse of this high-stakes deal dominated every major news outlet, with anchors dissecting every detail and analysts scrambling to make sense of the fallout. Moscow's North Korean lifeline severed, a tale of dud shells, broken promises, and shattered expectations. What was meant to be a covert operation now lay exposed, its failures impossible to hide. The world watched, transfixed, as a secret military pact between two isolated regimes collapsed in spectacular fashion. The alliance, once whispered about in intelligence circles, was now headline news, its secrecy stripped away. This wasn't just a failed transaction, it was the unraveling of a desperate strategy, a last-ditch effort to tip the scales in a grinding conflict. The paperwork, once a symbol of hope, now lay in tatters, a testament to miscalculation. The deal, meant to be Russia's secret weapon, was supposed to replenish its dwindling stockpiles for the war in Ukraine. Russian commanders had pinned their hopes on a steady flow of munitions to turn the tide on the battlefield. For North Korea, it was a lifeline, cash, fuel, and food in exchange for munitions. The regime saw an opportunity to ease crippling shortages and prop up its struggling economy, all while flexing its military muscle. But reality hit hard. Intelligence leaks revealed a disaster: dud shells, malfunctioning rockets, and logistical chaos. The much-hyped arsenal turned out to be riddled with flaws, leaving both sides scrambling for answers. Russian artillery, expecting a flood of ammunition, received unreliable junk instead. Frustration mounted as defective shells piled up, and frontline units found themselves dangerously undersupplied. The promised surge of firepower never materialized. Instead, chaos and embarrassment reigned. Commanders faced tough questions, and officials struggled to contain the political fallout. The headlines captured a monumental blunder, more than a military setback. It was a political earthquake. Commentators called it one of the most humiliating episodes in recent memory, a blow to both regimes' credibility. Russia's reliance on North Korea exposed the hollowness of its military-industrial complex. Once feared for its might, Russia now faced uncomfortable questions about its ability to sustain a prolonged conflict. North Korea's arsenal, feared for decades, was revealed as a paper tiger. The parade ground bravado masked deep flaws, and the world saw through the facade for the first time. The world saw in real time the risks of alliances built on desperation and mistrust. Global leaders took note, recalibrating their own strategies in the face of this cautionary tale. This collapse became a case study in the dangers of relying on unreliable partners during wartime. Historians and strategists alike pored over the details, searching for lessons to avoid similar disasters in the future. The lesson was clear: alliances of convenience are fragile and prone to spectacular failure. In the end, trust and capability matter more than desperation, and the world will remember this alliance as a warning for generations to come. The roots of this doomed deal lay in the grinding war in Ukraine, a conflict that had already dragged on for years, leaving devastation in its wake and pushing both sides to their limits. By late 2024, Russia's artillery stockpiles were running dry, and Western sanctions blocked new supplies. The Russian military, once confident in its vast reserves, now faced a critical shortage that threatened its entire campaign. Desperate, Moscow turned to Pyongyang, hoping North Korea's Soviet-era reserves could fill the gap. The Kremlin saw an opportunity in North Korea's massive, untouched stockpiles, munitions that had been gathering dust for decades. For Kim Jong-un, the offer was irresistible: billions in cash, fuel, and food for munitions. In a country where shortages were a daily reality, this was a lifeline that could prop up his regime and secure his grip on power. Secret meetings followed, with high-level delegations hammering out a pact shrouded in secrecy. Negotiators worked late into the night, aware that discovery could mean disaster for both sides. North Korea pledged millions of shells and short-range missiles. Russia promised aid, technology, and hard currency. The deal was ambitious, risky, and unprecedented in its scale. The plan seemed perfect: Russia would get firepower, North Korea would get survival. Both leaders hoped this alliance would tip the balance in their favor, reshaping the geopolitical landscape. Shipments began under the cover of darkness, cargo ships slipping between Raysun and Russian ports. Every movement was carefully concealed, with ships running dark to avoid detection by Western intelligence. Trains carried the first containers west toward Ukraine, winding through remote landscapes and crossing borders under the watchful eyes of security forces. In both capitals, there was cautious optimism. The alliance was working, or so it seemed. State media praised the partnership, and officials toasted to what they believed was a new era of cooperation. But the initial success masked deep problems. Behind closed doors, doubts and suspicions simmered as each side wondered if the other could be trusted. The munitions were old, the logistics complex, and the trust between partners paper-thin. Technical failures and bureaucratic delays began to pile up, threatening the fragile arrangement. The covert supply line, meant to outsmart the West, was about to unravel. Western intelligence agencies were closing in, tracking every suspicious movement and intercepting secret communications. What began as a high-stakes gamble would soon become a catastrophic failure. The alliance, built on desperation and secrecy, was crumbling under the weight of its own contradictions. The cracks were already forming beneath the surface, signaling the beginning of the end for Moscow and Pyongyang's risky partnership. The first signs of disaster appeared, subtle at first but quickly growing impossible to ignore. In the battered trenches of eastern Ukraine, where every shell could mean life or death, the tension was palpable. Russian artillery crews, desperate for a breakthrough and expecting salvation from the Kurlar Naistu Kopruzu Southern Korea, instead found only greater danger and confusion. North Korean shells meant to tip the balance were duds, or worse, they exploded prematurely, killing and maiming Russian troops in their own positions. Decades old, corroded, and poorly made, the ammunition was dangerously unreliable. Some shells didn't fit the guns at all, others veered wildly off course, missing their targets by hundreds of meters. Morale plummeted as soldiers joked grimly about Kim's surprise. Deliveries were erratic, shipments incomplete, and corruption rampant. Black market siphoning of munitions became common, with some shells never reaching the front. Logistical chaos plagued the supply chain, with officers unable to track what was lost to theft, incompetence, or simple mismanagement. Russian offensives stalled, unable to rely on their new munitions. Tanks and artillery sat idle, waiting for shells that never came or failed to fire. Ukrainian forces, sensing weakness, held their ground and even launched bold counterattacks, reclaiming lost territory and boosting their own morale. The supposed arsenal that was meant to turn the tide had failed its first real test, leaving Russian troops frustrated and exposed. Moscow's hopes for a swift victory dissolved into malfunction, disappointment, and a sense of betrayal that would haunt their war effort. Ukraine and its Western allies were watching and ready. Using satellite imagery, signals intelligence, and human sources, they tracked North Korean shipments. Ghost ships weren't invisible to Western surveillance. Once cargo reached Russian ports, sabotage began. Ukrainian special forces and partisans targeted railways, bridges, and trains. Explosions and derailments created chaos, stranding munitions far from the front. Cyber attacks corrupted Russian logistics, sending trains on wild goose chases. The supply line was strangled, shipments delayed or lost. Russia was forced to divert troops to guard railways, weakening its front lines. Ukraine proved that in modern war, intelligence and sabotage can cripple even the most secretive alliances. The collapse hit Pyongyang like a shockwave. Kim's regime, counting on Russian billions, got nothing but angry demands for refunds. The economic boom turned to bust. The regime's plans for relief vanished overnight. Political instability followed as Kim's image of strength was shattered. Elites, promised rewards, grew restless. Whispers of incompetence spread. The public, expecting better times, faced worsening shortages. The regime tightened control, ramping up surveillance and propaganda. The failure exposed North Korea's utter dependence on external support. Instead of international engagement, Pyongyang turned inward, focused on survival. The panic was real, and the consequences just beginning. In Moscow, fury replaced desperation. The Kremlin felt betrayed, supplied with junk, left exposed on the battlefield. Military officials who championed the deal faced political wrath. The blame game erupted, with ministries pointing fingers. Frontline commanders lost trust in Moscow. Morale plummeted. The partnership with North Korea dissolved into silence and recrimination. Russia halted technology transfers and aid, cutting off Pyongyang. The failed deal forced a painful reassessment. There were no easy fixes. Russia's position was weaker, its reputation tarnished. The lesson was brutal. Alliances built on desperation are doomed. The search for ammunition would continue, but with hard-won skepticism. The North Korea fiasco sent ripples through Russia's other alliances. Iran, a key supplier of drones and munitions, saw its leverage grow as Moscow became more dependent. But Tehran also took note of the risks. Western intelligence and sabotage were real threats. Iran refined its covert methods, wary of sharing North Korea's fate. China, meanwhile, watched from a distance. Beijing, officially neutral, offered economic support but no weapons. The chaos reinforced China's caution. Direct military aid was too risky. Russia's reliance on unreliable partners exposed the bloc's weaknesses. For China, a desperate Russia meant more influence but also more risk. The episode was a warning: alliances with volatile regimes are dangerous. In North Korea, failure could not go unpunished. Kim Jong-un launched a brutal purge, seeking scapegoats for the humiliation. Officials in munitions, logistics, and diplomacy were accused of treason and incompetence. Arrests and executions followed, sending a chilling message to the elite. The regime blamed traitors to deflect from systemic decay. North Korea's industrial base was crumbling, its stockpiles degraded. Purges only deepened dysfunction, as fear stifled honest reporting. The real problem: decades of mismanagement remained unsolved. The search for scapegoats was political theater, not a solution. The regime's weakness was now impossible to hide. The collapse of the $15.6 billion deal sent shockwaves worldwide. In Kiev, it was celebrated as a victory for intelligence and alliances. Western nations seized on the failure, pushing for tighter sanctions. The episode exposed the weakness of the so-called axis of autocrats. For the global South, Russia's reliance on North Korea was a sign of decline. The failed deal eroded Moscow's standing as a global power. The real lesson: wartime alliances built on desperation and mistrust are fragile. Trust and industrial capacity matter more than shared rhetoric. The North Korea-Russia pact failed because it lacked these essentials. In war, promises are cheap. Functional artillery shells are priceless.